Imagine building a company worth $1.5 billion. Investors lining up. Microsoft writing checks. The Qatar royal family backing your vision. Now imagine all of it, every dollar, every deal, every headline, built on a lie. A lie so brazen, so audacious, that the people inside the company had a joke for it. They called it A.G.I, not artificial general intelligence. A guy instead. This is the story of Builder.ai, and how one man convinced the world that a machine was doing the work, when really it was 700 people hidden behind a screen. It starts in 2016 in London with a founder named Sachin Dev Duggal. His pitch was simple, brilliant even. He told investors that building an app should be as easy as ordering a pizza. You pick what you want, you customize it, and the technology does the rest. No coding experience needed, no expensive developers, just an AI assistant named Natasha that would handle everything, from planning to code to launch. For small business owners who couldn't afford a tech team, this sounded like a dream. And for investors hunting for the next big thing in artificial intelligence, it sounded like a gold mine. The money came fast. In 2018, Builder.ai raised $29.5 million in its Series A round. Lakestar led it. Jungle Ventures and Deep Core piled in. Over the next few years, Insight Partners and even the World Bank's International Finance Corporation joined the cap table. The company was growing, the narrative was working, and then came the deal that changed everything. May 2023, Builder.ai closed a $250 million Series D round. The lead investor? The Qatar Investment Authority, the sovereign wealth fund of one of the richest nations on earth. And standing right beside them? Microsoft. Not just writing a check, but signing a strategic partnership. Natasha would be integrated into Microsoft Teams. The platform would run on Azure. This wasn't just funding anymore, this was a coronation. Builder.ai was now valued at $1.5 billion, a unicorn. Sachin Dev Duggal was on top of the world. But here's the thing about building a castle on sand. Sooner or later, someone looks down. Behind the polished demos and the investor decks, Builder.ai was running what insiders described as a Wizard of Oz operation. The curtain looked impressive, but behind it, chaos. Natasha, the so-called AI assistant, was marketed as a breakthrough in automated software engineering. She could recognize intent, plan user stories, generate clean, error-free code. At least that's what the pitch deck said. The reality was something else entirely. Over 700 engineers, most of them based in India, were doing the actual work. They were transcribing customer chats, routing requests manually, writing boilerplate code line by line. Every task that users believed was being handled by cutting-edge machine learning was actually being performed by a human being sitting at a desk. And the people inside Builder.ai knew it. That's where the joke came from. A.G.I, a guy instead. Some employees called the system actual Indians. It was dark humor born from a dark truth. The artificial intelligence that justified $1 billion valuation didn't really exist. Not in the way anyone was being told. Now, did Builder.ai have any real AI engineers? Yes. About 30 of them at peak. They worked with Python, integrated external large language models like GPT and Claude, and tried to build legitimate automation tools. But their work was constantly overshadowed by the need to keep the illusion alive. The human engineers were always the fail-safe, and more often than not, they were the primary producers of the final product. Meanwhile, the company was burning cash on redundant internal tools, a video conferencing platform called Builder Meet, a task management system called Builder Tracker, tools that already existed on the open market. But building them in-house served a purpose. It made the company look like a self-sustaining tech ecosystem. It distracted from the fact that the core engine, the thing the entire valuation was based on, was largely smoke and mirrors. But the deception didn't stop at technology. The financial fraud was even more elaborate. Between 2021 and 2024, Builder.ai engaged in what investigators would later describe as a round-tripping scheme with an Indian company called Verse Innovation, the parent company behind the Daily Hunt News app and the Josh video platform. The arrangement was simple in concept, but devastating in consequence. Builder.ai and Verse would invoice each other for roughly equivalent amounts. Services like app development and AI licensing were billed back and forth. Nearly $60 million moved between the two companies. The problem? Internal sources say the services were never actually delivered. The invoices were a fiction, a way to inflate revenue on both sides, a way to make growth look real when it wasn't. And that manufactured growth, it worked. It helped Builder.ai tell a story of explosive revenue to its board, its investors, and the world. It helped justify nearly $500 million in total funding. But the numbers were a house of cards. When a new CEO named Manpreet Rathia took over in early 2025 after Duggal stepped down, one of his first moves was to commission an internal audit. What he found was staggering. The company had told investors and creditors it was projecting $220 million in revenue for 2024. The real number? Closer to $55 million. That's not a rounding error, that's a 300% overstatement. And it wasn't just 2024. The 2023 figures were just as bad. Builder.ai had reported $180 million in sales. The audited number? $45 million. The gap was enormous, and it had been achieved through aggressive, fraudulent revenue recognition, booking revenue for contracts that hadn't been signed, counting receivables from resellers in the Middle East that apparently didn't exist. Now pause for a moment, because this story has another layer, a darker one. Before Builder.ai, before the unicorn valuation, before Microsoft and Qatar, Sachin Dev Duggal had a shadow following him. India's Enforcement Directorate, the agency responsible for investigating financial crimes, had named Duggal as a person of interest in one of the country's largest money laundering probes. The case involved the Videocon Group and the alleged laundering of 60,000 Indian crore rupees, that's billions of dollars, through oil and gas assets in Mozambique, Brazil, and Indonesia. The investigators claimed that Videocon had engaged in unexplained transactions with entities controlled by Duggal. His earlier company, Engineer.ai, the precursor to Builder.ai, was directly mentioned. Indian authorities summoned him multiple times. He didn't show. In February 2023, a court issued a non-bailable arrest warrant. Let that sink in. The same month, Builder.ai was gearing up for its biggest funding round ever. Its founder had an active arrest warrant in India connected to a multi-billion-dollar laundering investigation. And there's more. Saurabh Dut, the nephew of Videocon's chairman, sat on Builder.ai's board from 2018 to 2022. The connections between the startup and the scandal were not hidden. They were embedded in the company's own governance structure, which raises a question that still hasn't been fully answered. How did Microsoft miss this? How did the Qatar Investment Authority miss this? What kind of due diligence was performed on a company whose founder was facing criminal scrutiny in another country? By early 2025, the walls were closing in. The new CEO was discovering the scale of the financial misrepresentation. The revenue figures were being restated, and then the creditors came knocking. Viola Credit, an Israeli-based asset manager, had extended a $50 million debt facility to Builder.ai in late 2024. When they saw the restated numbers, they moved fast. In May 2025, Viola declared a default and exercised its control over the company's accounts. In one stroke, they seized between $37 and $40 million in cash. Builder.ai was left with roughly $5 million, most of it locked in Indian bank accounts, inaccessible, unusable. On May 20th, 2025, Manpreet Ratia got on a call with the entire global workforce. He told them the funds were gone. The board had made what he called an extremely difficult decision. The company would enter insolvency proceedings in multiple countries. Just like that, a billion-dollar unicorn was dead. The story wasn't over. Because while Builder.ai was imploding financially, it was also being investigated criminally. Weeks before the collapse went public, the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, one of the most feared prosecutorial offices in the world, had issued a subpoena. They wanted everything: internal financial statements, accounting policies, a full list of every customer the company had ever claimed, documentation on what Natasha actually was and how much of the work was done by humans. The SDNY doesn't issue subpoenas casually. Their involvement signals that federal prosecutors believe there may have been deceptive practices used to solicit investment from American companies like Microsoft and Amazon. Builder.ai's general counsel instructed all employees to preserve every internal record. The investigation was active and potentially criminal. The wreckage was enormous. 1,000 employees were terminated overnight. Many of them were the very engineers in India who had been the real engine behind the product, the people whose work had been hidden, rebranded as artificial intelligence and sold to the world as a technological breakthrough. Thousands of small business customers were left stranded. They had paid for apps that would never be finished. Their projects were frozen, their data locked up in insolvency proceedings. The people who were promised a painless entry into the digital economy were now forced to start over from scratch. And the debts? Builder.ai owed Amazon $85 million in unpaid cloud hosting fees. Microsoft was owed $30 million. These weren't small vendors. These were the same companies that had invested in and partnered with the startup. They were now its largest unsecured creditors. On June 2, 2025, Builder.ai officially filed for bankruptcy in Delaware. Insolvency proceedings were simultaneously launched in the United Kingdom and India. The company that had promised to democratize software development to make building an app as easy as ordering a pizza was finished. The Builder.ai collapse is more than a startup failure. It's a mirror held up to the entire AI industry. For years, the venture capital world poured money into companies based on narratives, not proof. The AI hype that followed the launch of ChatGPT created an environment where the words artificial intelligence on a pitch deck could unlock hundreds of millions of dollars. Nobody was checking under the hood. Nobody was asking whether the machine was real. Builder.ai exploited that gap perfectly, and the fallout is forcing a reckoning. Investors are now demanding technical proofs of concept instead of marketing decks. Regulators are treating AI washing, the practice of exaggerating or fabricating AI capabilities, as a form of fraud. The SDNY investigation is a signal that the era of unchecked AI claims may be coming to an end. And then there's the human cost that doesn't show up in the bankruptcy filings. 700 engineers in India did real, legitimate work. They built real software for real clients. But the company chose to hide them, to pretend they didn't exist, to rebrand their labor as machine intelligence because that story was worth more money. The deception didn't just defraud investors, it erased the contributions of hundreds of skilled professionals. $1.5 billion. Nearly $500 million raised. 1,000 jobs lost. Thousands of customers abandoned. Federal prosecutors circling. Arrest warrants in 2 countries. all because someone decided that the truth wasn't good enough. That the real story, a company using talented engineers to build software for small businesses, wasn't glamorous enough for Silicon Valley. So they wrapped it in a lie, called it AI, and sold it to the world. The pizza was never automated. It was always made by hand. They just didn't want you to know who was in the kitchen. Before you move on to the next story, tell us in the comments, which business or finance story should we uncover next? Because what's coming next, you don't want to miss. Like, subscribe, stay ready.